Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another RMA Fire tutorial, and today I'm gonna be teaching you some really awesome ways to texture in Redshift and Houdini. So we're gonna start off by building a base paint texture. Then the paint texture, we're gonna scratch all of the edges. Then I'm gonna show you guys a cool way of scratching out the center of it and isolating each of these parts so that you can build your own texture for each of these pieces. In addition to that, we're gonna be checking out some really cool image occlusion pass techniques to isolate certain parts of your geometry. And I'll be providing you with your file, so let's go ahead and get started.
Alright, so we're here inside of Houdini. Let me show you guys the scene. We have this basic mech model, we have an RS light, a dome that I'll provide you with this texture, with this HDR, and we have our camera. We're kind of coming to our material and we're gonna say Redshift material. On our Redshift material, we're gonna say RMA Fire base, and we're gonna create an RS material. This is gonna be the first material that we're gonna start with. Let's plug that in here, and on our first material, we're gonna come into our object here and RS material, and come into our material. Let's create a render view tab, select our camera and say render. That's gonna be our base. So this is what we're gonna be starting with. Now to start, I am gonna create a plastic material because I enjoy the way the plastic looks to start. Set this to blue, increase the roughness a little bit, and that's gonna be our base material. Now we're gonna create one more material, and this is gonna be a scratch material. So we're gonna make this an iron material, and we are gonna make it less reflective, more rough, and I'm gonna control the color here. So this is what we're gonna see when we scratch out the edges of our paint. Okay, so paint and edge scratch. Let's use an RS blend to blend both of our materials together. So our base is our base paint, and our second one, RS material blend. Sorry guys. Okay, so our base is our base paint. Our layer one is gonna be this one, and we're gonna plug them together, and you're gonna see that nothing happens. And that is because this is black. This works like a matte. We make this white and then we can see the one underneath. Okay, so we're gonna create a cool matte to reveal the layer underneath. RS curvature to start, and then this way we're gonna start with isolating our edges. Set to 0.1, and then what that means is that we're just gonna be scratching out the edges, but even though that's gonna work immediately, I wanted to have a little bit of noise so that it's less uniform. So let's use an RS noise. The lower the value, the bigger it is, the bigger the noise will be, and the lower the value here, the more contrast we're gonna get. RS color composite to mix both of these things together, these nodes together, and then we're gonna do a multiply, and you can see that's gonna break up. This noise is gonna break up our curvature. Plug this here and plug this in here, and then that is going to give us our scratched edges. See? Okay, now that we have the scratched edges, we're gonna scratch up the texture a little bit here so that it feels less uniform. So for the center scratches, let's call this center scratches. We're gonna connect this texture so that we can see what our center scratches look like, and we're gonna make these ones more reflective. And let's make this white so it's easy to see at first. Let's plug that into our second material. Plug this in here, and now we need a scratch layer for that. So let's do an RS texture. I have a scratch material here. I mean texture, and I'm gonna use an RStry planar, which is essentially a projector, and it projects your texture onto your object from all angles. So it just makes it easy to see. And then right now it's projected in at a very small size, so I'm gonna make this a 0.1. Okay. Now I am gonna want to invert this texture, RS invert, and I am going to, so remember the white is the ones that we actually see, right? I'm gonna use an RS ramp to crush the levels on this. And that feels like it could look pretty cool. Let's see what this scratch center parts look like. And there you go. Now we've got the scratches on sort of the center. So now the cool thing is if I grab this ramp, then I can reveal more scratches. Sweet. Okay guys, so now we want to break up the texture a little bit. If we look at the texture, it looks very uniform. So we want the insides, sort of where the motor and the engine is heating up, to look like, you know, they're burnt, and the ones outside a little bit less. So let's create another material, and I'm gonna start off with this material, and then this one is gonna have sort of like darker properties. So this is gonna be like darker blues, something like that. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna use an RS8O, so an ambient occlusion pass. I'll show you what this looks like. So this isolates our crevices a little bit, so we're gonna use an RS ramp to control this, and the RS ramp is going to make the insides dark and the outsides less dark, and we're gonna use this to isolate the insides and the outsides. Now this is perfectly uniform right now. I'm gonna need to use a little bit of a noise, so an RS noise, to help me break things up a little bit more. Okay, so on our noise, we'll come here and we'll set this to a 2, and let's just make it much more complex. And set this to a 1. We're gonna use an RS color composite, and we're gonna blend using a subtract. So as you can see, this already looks like a promising matte. So the parts on the inside have that white, so that white is what's going to be revealed, and the parts on the outside have more black, so those aren't gonna be as burnt. So I'm gonna use an RS ramp here on the outside to control the intensity. Okay, and let's see what this looks like. And as you can see, we start to see those inside parts that are darker. It breaks up the texture a little bit. Let's see if we change this to a different color. Okay, so that's working. Let me see my ramp, the material, the ramp. Okay, and you can see that that texture is being revealed inside here. See how we're starting to get that color. This is gonna be our layer 3. If we disconnect this and we make this completely white, you see that we see it revealed entirely. But the effect that we're going for, it's kind of like a little bit more subtle. It's just adding that additional tone to break up our texture a little bit. So I'm gonna make this kind of my darker blues. And I am going to reduce the reflection and make it much more rough. So you can see that it starts to feel like a little bit of a different tone, like darker in there. Now the other thing that we can do is I'm gonna come into my base material, and this is our blue from the start, and I'm gonna roughen out the parts where it becomes more reflective and less reflective. So let's use the same RS texture technique, and then on this texture we're gonna apply this to the roughness of the reflections. So let's use something like this. RStry planar, set it to a 0.1. Come here and plug this into a reflection roughness and plug this into our texture. And immediately you're gonna see that it casts lighter and darker sort of tones, because these ones are shiny and the other ones aren't shiny, and they're being revealed through this matte. Alrighty, so that way you can start to add more detail to each of the mattes that we've added. So that's gonna give us a little bit more detail there. We've got our edge scratches here, and then we can come into our edge scratch and say, hey, maybe I'm gonna add a little bit of blues in there. Okay, so we're gonna come here and make this dark blue, and you can see that it looks a little bit more natural because now our edge scratch isn't like fully white. See? And then our center scratches say that we want them to be a little bit less intense. So we bring this down a little bit. So now our center scratches are a little bit less intense. So that's how you can begin to like add layers and layers and layers to continually increase the complexity of your model. You can see that we're starting to get some pretty cool details in there. I'm gonna make my edge scratches sort of like a lighter blue, so it doesn't feel so alienated, and so that they're still getting that contrast. Sweet. I'm trying to think about any other thing that I can show you guys to give you some ideas on how you can push this further. Let's see. We can do one more thing, or we're gonna use another texture in here on our diffuse, and we're gonna use that to break up our diffuse a little bit more. So let's plug in our diffuse. We have our paint, and then we're gonna use this triplanar in our diffuse, and that's what this noise is doing. And then we're gonna grab that, and I'm gonna grab my make this about a 3. .05, and that's kind of what I'm looking for, something that it's gonna allow me to blend between two different types of blues. RS color composite, and then I'm gonna use an RS constant. Let's plug this RS constant in here and say something like a blue, and then we're gonna do a average. Subtract, multiply, let's see what works. So that's giving me that, more of a broken up texture. a little bit. See, it looks worn out, so we can control um, worn out spots in this way. Let's bring this back, and then that way we have another additional layer of detail, almost like it's gone through war or something. So our paint layer, let me just save our paint layer right here. Um, seems to be okay. So like our scratches or like any of the layers that we're using here, we can drive that through a bump or a displacement. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my scratches, and this part right here we're gonna use an RS bump. Input this here and drive it through our bump. And now you can see that those scratches are starting to actually carve in. Looks pretty cool because you can see how they're actually doing crevices inside of the geometry. I'm not sold on the color of the edge scratches being like this. I'm gonna take it back to a white. And if you want to break that up even more, you can apply something like this. So that means that the edges of our color have that sort of a broken up texture. So so what you would do is you would grab, oops, let's see what happened here. Let me just take a step back. I was trying to go too fancy. So what you can do is just use two different tones to mix it and get different colors on the scratch, so that the scratch isn't all entirely uniform. Okay, and then we can take this even further by adding a displacement or something, like an additional layer of detail. So say if we are gonna do an RS displacement, let's plug in our center scratches here. Let's plug this into the displacement. Let's stop the render for a sec. Save. Come into our object, Redshift, tessellation and displacement. Enable the displacement. We're not gonna use tessellation, but we're gonna set the displacement to say like a 0.1. And this is gonna add some displacement onto our scratches. But as you can see, we would probably need to tessellate the model, and and right now I wasn't planning on doing displacement. Now I'm going a little bit fancy, but we can make it a bump map. We can apply this into the bump. So we can either use a bump blend and mix two different bumps, so RS bump blender, and this blend would be basically the same thing that we were doing on the other side, just blending between two different materials, and the blend weight with control right here. So let's try this. I'm gonna leave it to like a 0.5. So we're getting some pretty cool detail now. What I'm gonna do is come here into my object, split this top and bottom, and I'm gonna grab my camera, hit enter, then hit Z in order to get this, and let's get some nice depth of field in there. Depth of field enabled, and let's do more depth of field. And let's move our dome around a little bit just so that we can see what it looks like from another. Oops, not there. Probably want to move it here. Let me just disable it from the background. Okay, and that's giving us some um, pretty cool look. I mean, for the demo, I think this is good. But it shows you how you can mix materials and use build mats inside of Houdini to roughen this out. You can see that it looks worn out there. The inside looks a little bit crazier. Then we've got the scratches that we can bring back and forth, and we can increase the amount of worn edges that we have on our model. Sweet, guys. Feel free to leave any questions. Any questions, comments, any thoughts on how we can push this further, and we'll be back with more.